The hatchery manager didn't even unlock the office. Instead, he walked Margaret Hale straight to the nursery ponds. Thousands of tiny fish shimmered beneath the surface. They were only a few inches long, barely larger than minnows. Healthy, fast, perfectly active. The manager sighed. "I've got a problem." Margaret looked into the water. "Grass carp." He nodded. "About 8,200. Nathan knelt beside the pond. "They look fine." "They are." The manager skipped a flat stone across the water. "That's exactly the problem." Margaret looked puzzled. "I don't understand. We planned for 3 vegetation control contracts." He shrugged. Every one of them was canceled. Nathan frowned. "So now I've got thousands of fish eating me out of business." The manager looked back at Margaret. "If they stay here another season." He laughed quietly. "I'll spend more feeding fish nobody wants." Margaret watched the young carp schooling together. Grass carp weren't glamorous. Nobody stocked them for sport. Nobody admired them like trophy base. Their job was simple. Eat aquatic vegetation. Lots of it. The hatchery manager folded his arms. "I'll practically give them away." Nathan smiled. "You already know she's interested." Margaret didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched one group grazing soft algae growing along the shoreline. Then she smiled. "I've got some ponds." The Hale Ranch contained nearly 40 acres of spring-fed ponds scattered across the property. Some supplied livestock. Others supported forage fish. Several had become heavily overgrown with submerged vegetation after years of light use. Most pond owners considered thick aquatic weeds a constant battle. Margaret considered them lunch. Years earlier, Samuel Hale stood beside one of those ponds holding a long rake. Every pool brought up enormous mats of pondweed. Margaret frowned. "That looks miserable." Samuel smiled. "It is." He tossed another dripping pile onto the bank. "There has to be an easier way." Samuel laughed. "There probably is." He leaned on the rake. "But I haven't found it." 20 years later, Margaret remembered that conversation perfectly. The hatchery loaded oxygen tanks onto her trailer. Workers carefully transferred thousands of young grass carp into hauling containers. The manager handed Margaret the paperwork. "You know?" She looked up. "What?" "I've never had anyone excited about grass carp." Margaret smiled. "I don't think I'm buying fish." He looked confused. "What then?" "I'm buying employees." The county heard about it before sunset. Naturally. Saturday morning the diner sounded unusually lively. Dale Harper folded his newspaper. "You hear what Margaret bought?" Rick looked up. "What now?" 8,000 grass carp. Several farmers laughed. "For what?" Dale shrugged. "Apparently she needed more fish." Another rancher grinned. "Maybe she's opening a seafood restaurant." The room erupted. Margaret walked inside carrying fencing staples. Dale waved. "Morning. Morning." He smiled. "So." She laughed. "So. How are the vegetarian fish?" "They're hungry." More laughter. "What exactly are they eating?" Margaret smiled. "I hope." She paused. "Everything I don't want." Nobody understood. Back at the ranch, stocking lasted 2 full days. Each pond received carefully calculated numbers. Not too many. Not too few. Samuel always believed balance mattered more than quantity. Nathan watched the last tank empty. "They're tiny. They won't stay that way." The first summer passed quietly. The grass carp disappeared beneath thick aquatic vegetation. Sometimes weeks passed without anyone seeing one. Neighbors joked that the fish had escaped. Nathan wasn't completely sure they hadn't. Until one August morning. He walked around the largest pond, then stopped. Half the pondweed was gone. Open water reflected the sky for the first time in years. He hurried toward the house. "Margaret." She joined him a few minutes later. He pointed. "They've been busy." She smiled. They finally settled in. The county extension fisheries specialist visited that autumn. He slowly walked around every pond. Open water. Healthier shorelines. Improved oxygen readings. Less decaying vegetation. He nodded. "Remarkable." Nathan laughed. "You said that before." "I know." The specialist crouched beside the shoreline. "I expected algae blooms." Instead, the ponds looked healthier than ever. Margaret kept careful records. Vegetation coverage. Water clarity. Fish growth. Every month another notebook filled. Samuel had always insisted. Measure first. Guess later. The grass carp continued growing. By their second year, many weighed nearly 10 pounds. Vegetation remained under control without chemicals, without mechanical harvesters, without endless labor. Then another unexpected benefit appeared. Waterfowl arrived. Open channels attracted ducks. Herons returned. Bass fishing improved because predator fish could actually reach bait fish again. The ponds became balanced ecosystems instead of weed-choked marshes. Nathan smiled one evening. They've done more work than we ever could. Margaret nodded. They're still working. The hatchery manager stopped by during the third summer. He walked around the largest pond in complete silence. Finally he spoke. I honestly didn't expect this. Margaret smiled. What? They look incredible. He pointed toward enormous shadows gliding beneath the surface. Several grass carp now exceeded 20 pounds. Healthy. Powerful. Exactly the kind of brood fish hatcheries dreamed about. The manager looked thoughtful. You've barely harvested any. I wasn't planning to. He raised an eyebrow. No. Margaret smiled. I've been growing something. What? She looked toward the water. Time. The answer puzzled him. But she explained. Every year the healthiest grass carp survived. Only the strongest fish remained. The ponds became carefully managed broodstock reservoirs. She wasn't raising fish for immediate sale. She was quietly building exceptional breeding stock. The fourth year brought something nobody expected. An aggressive invasive aquatic weed spread across lakes throughout the region. Boat ramps closed. Reservoirs struggled. Municipal water managers searched desperately for environmentally responsible vegetation control. Chemical treatments became increasingly expensive. Mechanical harvesting barely kept up. Suddenly, interest in grass carp exploded. The hatchery received hundreds of calls. Unfortunately, years of declining demand had convinced many producers to reduce breeding programs. Brood fish became surprisingly scarce. One afternoon, the hatchery manager drove onto the Hale Ranch. This time he looked different. Worried, he watched enormous grass carp cruise through Margaret's clear ponds, then quietly removed his hat. I've got a question. Margaret smiled. Go ahead. He pointed toward one massive fish gliding beneath the surface. Do you realize those might be some of the best brood grass carp left anywhere in this part of the state? The hatchery manager stood silently beside the pond. One enormous grass carp glided just beneath the surface. Its broad silver body reflected the afternoon sun. He looked back at Margaret. Do you realize those might be some of the best brood grass carp left anywhere in this part of the state? Margaret watched the fish disappear into deeper water. I was hoping they'd mature well. The manager laughed quietly. They've done much more than that. Nathan folded his arms. So what happens now? The manager hesitated. Honestly, he looked almost embarrassed. We need help. Margaret didn't answer immediately. She remembered the day the hatchery had considered those tiny fish almost worthless. Now the same hatchery stood beside her ponds asking about them. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The manager continued. The invasive hydrilla outbreak is spreading faster than expected. He pulled several photographs from his folder. Entire reservoirs buried beneath thick aquatic weeds. Boat ramps completely blocked. Irrigation canals clogged. Municipal water districts searching desperately for biological vegetation control. Our phone hasn't stopped ringing. He sighed. And we don't have enough brood fish left to meet demand. Margaret looked toward her ponds. The giant grass carp cruised calmly through crystal clear water. Healthy. Strong. Exactly as she had hoped. She finally smiled. I'll sell fish. The manager brightened. But. He laughed. I knew there'd be a but. I'm not selling all of them. He nodded. I wouldn't either. That became the agreement. Only mature brood fish beyond what her ponds required would leave the ranch. The strongest genetics stayed. Samuel had written something similar years earlier. Never sell tomorrow to solve today's problem. Margaret followed that advice faithfully. The first harvest began before sunrise. Specialized seine nets stretched across the largest pond. Nathan carefully guided the fish towards shallow water. The fisheries biologist supervised every step. No rushing. No unnecessary stress. Each grass carp was measured, weighed, inspected. Only exceptional fish entered the oxygenated transport tanks. One hatchery technician stared at the first load. I've never seen brood grass carp this clean. The manager smiled. They've spent 5 years growing instead of being shipped. By noon, the first truck rolled toward the hatchery. Inside were only 60 brood fish. Yet everyone understood their value. Those 60 fish represented the future of thousands more. The following spring proved them right. The hatchery's spawning season became the most successful in over a decade. Healthy eggs. Excellent hatch rates. Strong fry survival. The manager called Margaret personally. You should see this. A week later, Margaret walked through the hatchery nursery. Millions of tiny grass carp fry shimmered beneath the water. The manager smiled. These all came from your brood stock. Nathan laughed. So those little fish really did become employees. The manager nodded. They're working overtime. Word spread quickly through the aquaculture industry. Universities requested tours of the Hale ponds. Water districts visited. Conservation agencies stopped by. Most expected sophisticated technology. Instead, they found something remarkably simple. Healthy spring-fed ponds. Balanced vegetation. Patient management. Years of careful record-keeping. One graduate student asked Margaret, "What special feed produces brood fish like these?" She smiled. "No special feed." Another asked, "Growth hormones?" "No." "Genetic modification?" She laughed. "Not even close." The room grew quiet. Margaret held up one of Samuel's notebooks. "We manage the ponds instead of chasing quick growth." She opened a page filled with neat handwriting. Water temperature, oxygen, vegetation coverage, seasonal observations, everything recorded. The fisheries professor nodded. Good biology begins with good notes. That sentence became famous among the students. By the 6th year, the Hale Ranch supplied brood fish to hatcheries across 3 states. Margaret still refused to overharvest. Demand continued growing. Waiting lists became normal. One afternoon, a representative from a national aquaculture company arrived in a black pickup. He toured every pond, asked dozens of questions, then made an offer. "We'd like to purchase the entire brood program." Nathan nearly dropped his clipboard. The number was enormous. Enough to retire comfortably. The representative smiled. "You've built something extraordinary." Margaret looked across the ponds. Schools of grass carp moved quietly beneath the clear water. She smiled. "I'm flattered." "So?" He waited. "What's your answer?" "No." He blinked. "No. I'll partner." Silence. "But I'm not selling the foundation." He laughed. "I've never had anyone refuse that offer." Margaret nodded. "My grandfather spent too many years building these ponds." Instead of buying the operation, the company entered a long-term breeding agreement. The Hale Ranch remained independent. The brood stock stayed exactly where it belonged. Years later, Dale Harper visited one quiet evening. They walked beside the largest pond. Massive grass carp glided beneath the surface like slow-moving submarines. He folded his arms. "You know what still bothers me?" Margaret smiled. "What?" I laughed. "You did. I called them worthless weeds with fins." She laughed. "You weren't the only one." He watched one enormous fish disappear beneath the lilies. "I thought they were just pond cleaners." Margaret picked up a handful of healthy aquatic plants growing naturally along the shoreline. "They are." Dale looked confused. "Then what's all this?" She smiled. "They clean the ponds." She pointed toward the hatchery trucks loading young fish in the distance. "And the ponds built everything else." Late that autumn, the State Fisheries Association honored the Hale Ranch for excellence in sustainable broodstock management. The ceremony took place beside the original pond, where the 8,200 fry had first been released. The hatchery manager stood beside Margaret during the presentation. He laughed quietly before handing her the award. "You know?" She smiled. "What?" "I almost sold these fish for less than they cost to raise." Margaret nodded. "I remember." He looked toward the pond. "I thought I was getting rid of a problem." She looked across the calm water. "No." "What then?" "You were giving something time." After the ceremony ended, school children gathered near the dock. One little boy watched a giant grass carp slowly cruise beneath the clear water. He looked up at Margaret. "Did you know they'd get this big?" She smiled. "I hoped." "Did you know everyone would want them?" She shook her head. "No." "Then why did you keep them?" Margaret looked toward Samuel's oldest notebook resting inside the visitor center. She remembered one sentence written decades earlier. "Healthy things become valuable long before people notice." She smiled. "I believe they still had growing left to do." The boy nodded thoughtfully. Years earlier, the hatchery saw 8,200 unwanted grass carp fry. They saw canceled contracts, feed bills, crowded nursery ponds. Most people saw ordinary vegetation control fish worth very little. Margaret saw healthy genetics with nowhere to go. She never expected invasive weeds to transform the market. She never predicted hatcheries would someday compete for the same fish they once considered surplus. She simply believed that patience often creates value where urgency only sees expense. By the time millions of healthy grass carp fry were once again leaving hatcheries across the region, very few people remembered the day those original fish had been written off as worthless. Margaret remembered, because every thriving brood program, every restored reservoir, and every hatchery rebuilding its stock traced back to one decision made beside a quiet nursery pond. Sometimes the greatest investment isn't buying something everyone wants. Sometimes it's recognizing the future in something everyone else has already given up on.